welcome to Story Time with Edna. Today we'll be reading the story Wiggling Worms at Work by Wendy Pfeffer, illustrated by Steve Jenkins. In this story, we are going to read and learn about worms. Let's see how worms work hard to help our plants grow. Down in the ground under your feet, thousands of worms wiggle around flower bulbs and tunnel under trees. They twist and turn, eating almost anything in their way. These wiggling worms are at work. Farmers plow their fields to loosen the soil. Crumbling soil lets the roots of plants spread out and grow. Worms also loosen the soil as they wiggle around. They are called nature's plows. As worms twist and turn, they push aside loose soil. This creates tunnels. Air flows along these tunnels. Rainwater trickles down. Roots drink it up. Helps plants grow better. There they are, creating tunnels. Worms tunnel in hard-packed soil by swallowing it. The soil goes into the worm's mouth, slides into the crop, and then passes down into the gizzard. It's got a long ways to go. Worms do not have teeth. Muscles, fine grains of sand, and small stones in the gizzard grind the soil. Worms digest leaf and plant bits that are found in the soil, just as you digest a salad. What's left passes through the worm's body and comes out its tail in the form of pellets called worm castings. These castings make good plant food. They help fruits and vegetables grow bigger and better. And there they are, through and out their tail, and they create little tiny piles that look like dirt, but they're worm castings. Sometimes worms crawl above ground. When they tunnel back down into the ground, they pull dead leaves and plants down with them. These plants make the soil better as they rot. Seeds come down too. Some of these seeds send up roots. Seedlings sprout. Worms help new plants to begin to grow, just like we were growing our seedlings, and it sprouts up. Worms can wiggle, twist, and turn, and even tie themselves into knots because they have no backbone. Their soft bodies are made up of rings or segments. These segments act like little coils on a slinky toy. They let a worm bend. A worm has no legs, but 8 bristles under each segment, and they act like little legs. They help a worm move. Strong muscles allow the worms to stretch out its front end. It becomes long and thin. Then the worm fastens its front bristles to the soil, and the back end slinks up, making the worm short and fat. What do we see here? The worm wiggles around, stretching and slinking, stretching and slinking. With all its wiggling, twisting, and turning, it's a wonder a worm knows where it's headed. It has no eyes, no nose, no ears, and hardly any brain at all. But a worm knows what's happening nearby. It feels vibrations on the ground and senses a hungry robin. Quickly, the worm slips back into its burrow. Hiding is the only way it can protect itself from enemies. Worms also hide from the sun. They must live in damp soil since they breathe air through their moist skin. In the hot sun, their skins dry up and they can't breathe. So they need to stay moist. Sometimes worms crawl to the surface to find food. They select dead and decaying plants to drag back to their burrows. These plants contain bacteria that worms eat. Healthy plants do not. Worms pick leaves with pointed ends rather than round ones. Nobody knows why. Worms also eat fungi and mold. They slurp the hair-like strands of mold the same way you might slurp your spaghetti. Worms eat at the entrance of their burrows. Then each worm covers any leftover plants with its castings. This pile of worm castings is called a midden. It hides the top of the worm's burrow, and it acts like a door to keep out bad weather and rain. So there we see right here a little pile of worm castings. In spring, before the weather warms, worms wiggle to the surface to mate. Worms are different from most other animals. Each worm is both male and female, but each one still needs a mate. After mating, each worm crawls back into its burrow. When the weather cools, a ring-like cocoon forms near the head of each worm that has mated. Slowly begins to move backward. The cocoon inches forward on the worm's body, just as if a ring on your finger would move. The cocoon passes over openings in the worm's body. Up to 30 eggs slip out of the openings and into the cocoon. In a few minutes, the cocoon slips off the worm's head, just as a ring would slip off your finger. The ends of the cocoon close. Inside the cocoon, the eggs are fertilized. So it moves down the body and collects its eggs and then slips off. And there's a cocoon. In about 3 weeks, the eggs hatch. Out of about 30 eggs, only 3 or 4 wormlets will emerge from each cocoon. They look like tiny pieces of cotton thread, less than an inch long. But they are fully developed worms and live completely on their own. They do not need parents to help them. The wormlets inch along, finding bits of dead plants to eat, dragging them to their tunnels and covering any leftovers with castings. They wiggle underground, loosening the soil and making tunnels. Even tiny wormlets help the soil. These babies grow fast. In 6 weeks, they are adult worms. That is fast. In winter, the soil near the surface freezes. The worms plug up their tunnels and move down to warmer soil. They stay there until spring. Then they wiggle up, tunneling, twisting, and turning until they're right under your feet again. Look at how they curl up in the warm soil for the winter. Vegetables and flowers grow better, trees grow bigger, grass grows greener, because there are thousands of wiggly worms at work. So that was our story about working worms. Do you remember what it said a worm felt like and how it bends? Do you remember where to look for worms? Well, come back this afternoon for Science Wonders as we go on a worm hunt, and we are going to be making a wormery, a habitat for worms. So come on back, and thanks for joining me for Wiggling Worms. Bye, boys and girls.